wonderful activist who's doing some things to come against and eradicate militarism in two ways that I think are key. The eradication of the death penalty, but also by taking weapons, guns, and turning them into tools to plant and to grow and to sow, which has a great spiritual significance that he highlights as well. And so we want to welcome our friend, a friend of the King Center, Brother Shane Claiborne, as he comes on now to continue this conversation around militarism. And not just talking about it, Brother Shane, but talking about how we can eradicate it. You know, we can have great conversations, but then we
Yes,
have to go put in the work, right?
I know
Welcome.
that's right. I know that's
Thank you
right.
for joining us. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm doing so well. Better now. I mean, it's a in one way it's a heavy day, as we remember what
Mm-hmm.
happened to Dr. King, but we also are filled with hope. We know that love triumphs over hatred and life conquers death. I mean, the whole Christian story's got that paradox, of
Mm-hmm.
life and death kind of at war. And but you mentioned the swords to plows image of the prophets, and one of the things I love about that is it's this proclamation that things can be made right. That
Yes.
even metal that is crafted to kill can be recrafted to cultivate life, and all things can be made new. So when we do that, it's a declaration of that. I got a couple of them I brought with me. This is one of our shovels that's made. You
Mm-hmm.
can you can actually still see the Winchester up there. That it originally was a gun. Even the wood stock is made, into the handle of it. So Walter Brueggemann, he talks about the prophetic imagination, and he says sometimes we misunderstand the prophets, and we think that they were fortune tellers, but they were actually truth tellers. They weren't just trying to predict the future; they were trying to change the future by waking us up and inviting us to have a different imagination about
Mm-hmm.
where we're headed. So that's what we're about, is that kind of prophetic imagination. And Dr. King had that, right? That
He
that
did.
sense that
Absolutely.
it doesn't have to be this way. And the other thing I love about the image is that it says that nation will not rise up against nation; they will study war no more. But the change begins with the people. And as you read that prophecy of Mike and Isaiah, it's this image that peace doesn't come from the top down. Peace comes from the bottom up. Change comes from the bottom. It's not the kings and the politicians and the presidents that lead us to peace. They keep leading us into the wars. It's the people who are so tired of violence that they begin to take things into their own hands, and they begin to transform those tools of
Mm-hmm.
death into tools of
They
life. So that's
they
what we're
become,
doing.
in fact, Brother Shane, Dr. King used this phrase, transformed nonconformists.
Mm, mm,
That the
that's it.
people who are rising up have, in a sense, said, we're not going to study war anymore. We won't accept militarism. We won't accept poverty. We won't accept racism and all these iterations of bigotry and discrimination. And when the people say we've
Whew.
had enough, I think that's what Dr. King was calling us up to. This call to consciousness, where he talked about unarmed truth and unconditional love. Then we have phrases like militarism, Brother Shane, that when we use that, I become concerned that people might not know just what that is. That is
Yes.
the use of force, weapons, government control, government, you know, armies, militaries, to keep people in check. And sometimes when we hear it, people think it's just about the Navy, or it's just about a branch of an actual military. But we've seen, particularly in the United States recently, militarized policing. And then we see the effect of building empire that doesn't care about people, and how that causes racism and the death penalty and different issues concerning the death penalty. I wanted to talk with you about that for a moment. How do you believe militarism is showing up in death penalty policies in the United States? Just giving people a different understanding of militaristic thinking, the notion that it's okay to bomb people or
Mm,
to hurt people or to tear gas people to get our way. That's the
yes.
simplified way of thinking about it.
Yes, Lord, you preaching tonight, Dr. Bonnet. But one of the things that King does so well is name all of the different manifestations of violence and say
Hmm.
violence is the problem, not the solution. Violence is the disease, not the cure. We're not going to bomb our way into peace. And he names that contradiction that we're telling young people that violence won't solve their problems, but then they ask us, why does our government use massive doses of violence to try to solve
Hmm.
its problems? And with the death penalty, we do the same thing, right? We're teaching our young people that two wrongs actually can make a right, because
Make it
that's
right.
exactly what it does, right? Like we're trying to kill to show that killing is wrong. And you can't do that. We don't rape people to show that rape is wrong. And there's something wrong with that
Mm.
logic that we're going to deal with violence on its own terms. And so, there's folks that kind of push back when Dr. King in the Riverside speech calls America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. But I want to say we should just step back a little bit and think about this, that there's lots of folks that talk about American exceptionalism, right? In terms of, we're this kind of beacon of freedom and light. We're this messianic force, divine kind of people in the world. And Dr. King kind of pushes back on that and says, don't let anybody make you think America is God's messianic force to be reckoned with. But we've got this different version of American exceptionalism, which is true. We are obsessed with violence. We're one of the only countries in the world that still executes its own people every year. The United States is in the top 5 executing countries of the world. Often we're always in the top 10. And that's the wrong side of history when it comes to the death penalty. We can do better than trying to kill to show that killing's wrong. And Dr. King named that. He said that the death penalty society's final assertion that
Final
we
assertion.
will not
Yes.
forgive. But then he calls out the culture of violence. And in the United States, I mean, we have more guns than people, Dr. Vanetta. We got 5 times more McDonald's restaurants, 5 times more gun dealers than McDonald's restaurants. 5 times more gun dealers. We've got 5% of the world's population, but almost half of the world's guns. So that's why we're inviting people to disarm, But when it comes to militarism, and that's what we're talking about tonight, the triplets of evil are, the militarism. There's only a handful of countries that have nuclear weapons. Out of 196 countries, only 9 countries have nuclear weapons. And 93% of the nuclear weapons are owned by 2 countries,
Hmm.
the US and Russia. We have the capacity in the US of 100,000 Hiroshima bombs. And you start to just sit back and go, wow, that's evil. That's evil, right? And we're the only country that has ever used nuclear weapons. And we did it twice in 1 week, dropping them on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this is that's the exceptionalism, is how we continue to live by the sword and die by the sword. And so
And
Dr.
die by the
King,
sword.
in this speech, I mean, he
Yeah.
really invites us to get the log out of our own country's eye. And we're all upset about Russia right now, as we should be. But, in 2003, we were dropping 900 bombs a day on Iraq. And I was there, Dr. Vanetta, as you might know, with, as a part of the resistance, the peace team, and I picked up a piece of shrapnel. This is in March of 2003. This is a bomb that was dropped by the U.S. on a public market where dozens of people lost their lives. And you start to see Dr. King say, they must see us as strange liberators because we did all of this in the name of freedom and democracy. Even now, we look back and 15 of the 19 hijackers of 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. But we declared war on Afghanistan and Iraq, and we're still selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, the biggest buyer of U.S. military weapons. So, I mean, that's the contradiction that King saw, right? Is that we're providing arms to the whole world and continuing to prove that Jesus is right when he said, you live by the sword, you're going to die by it.
Let me ask you a question, Brother Shane, because as you were talking, about something from Dr. King's Beyond Vietnam, where he talked about we need to, first, he said, our concerns need to become ecumenical rather than sectional. But he also mentioned that we need to focus on broader allegiances and loyalties than nationalism and our nation's goals. And I
Yes.
think one of the things you're talking about that's causing a log to be in our eye is nationalism. And we think about nationalism and its impact on cultivating militarism, this idea that we have to protect our territory, and that this nation built empire through slavery and
Yes.
through genocide. And that's what imperialism is. We'll talk about imperialism more with Dr. Cornel West, but can you share for a moment, how do we get to those broader allegiances? I think Dr. King's talking about spiritual allegiances, allegiances to humanity that
Yes.
cause us to say we won't study war. We're going to turn guns into tools of peace. We're going to end the death penalty. How do we
Mm.
get there? Give us some insight.
Well, that calling beyond nationalism is a radical call. You know, Mother Teresa. She, as I was listening to Dr. King's, reading the speech again, one of the lines that I reminded me of something Mother Teresa said, and she said, "Sometimes our biggest problem is that the circle we draw around our family is too small." Woo! Is too small, right? And that's the problem with nationalism, is that the circle we put around our family is too small. And Dr. King is inviting us to love bigger, to love better, to say that if someone is suffering on the other side of the wall in the US and Mexico, or the wall in Israel and Palestine, it's as troubling as if it were my
Mm-hmm.
own mother, father, or sister and brother. And I grew up in the evangelical church, and it kind of became cliche to have the born again experience. And we kind of trivialize that. But I almost think we got to take it back and say that what Jesus is inviting us into is to have a bigger vision of family. That we are born again, and even when his own biological mother and brother come, they say, "Your mom and brother are here," and Jesus says, "Who is that? Who's my family? My family's bigger than biology." And that is what we are invited into, is this fellowship, this family, this beloved community that is bigger than biology, bigger than nationality, and saying that every person is made in the image of God, and they're just as precious as my own kin.
Yes. Now that thinking will help us conquer militarism, because we'll consider how we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Listen, if you're watching right now, as we conclude our conversation with Brother Shane, I want you to tweet, post right now this quote from Dr. King. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. If we're going to conquer militarism, racism, poverty, and all the iterations of those three, we are going to have to realize that we are interconnected, interdependent. What Brother Shane is talking about, even if you're not a Christian, if you don't follow Jesus, you need to grab the idea that we are a human family. And what happens to someone in Russia, Tigray, what happens to someone in the Congo, what happens to someone in Australia, what happens in Yemen, what happens in Palestine on the Gaza Strip, it happens to me, because we belong to each other. So get that quote. I want you to tweet that with hashtag Beloved Community Talks, hashtag, what are our hashtag, Brother Shane? Militarism. That's it.
Military
Hashtag
triplets.
militarism,
Yep.
hashtag MLK. Get
Yes.
that out there. Brother Shane, one last comment for us this evening. One thing you want to share to encourage people to accept the call to conscience to eradicate these triple evils.
I want to say that as I look at Dr. King constantly, one of the things that strikes me is that he knows that this is a countercultural call. It is a call to
Mm-hmm.
revolution, and it's a revolution of love. And it's that, when someone threw an insult that he was maladjusted, he embraced it, and he said we've become way too adjusted to some
Injustice
things
we
we should
have.
not be adjusted to. Right? We become
Mm-hmm.
way too adjusted to violence and to racism and to inequity between the rich and the poor. So we need some holy maladjusted people, and to stand against the triplets of evil is to stand for love, and that can be something that might lead us to jail. But as John Lewis and Dr. King would say, that's why we can smile in our mugshots, because we know that we're on the right side of history. But right now, it is a countercultural call that goes against the cultural values of racism and militarism and materialism.
Thank you so much, Brother Shane. You've given
Thank
us
you.
our second statement. Our first statement was, I will accept the call to conscience. This is the first statement, rather, was, I will accept the call to conscience. The second statement is this: I will be maladjusted to injustice. I want you to tweet that, write that down. We're talking about how to do the work after this, and there's some inside work we need to do. I will accept the call to conscience. I will be maladjusted to injustice. Thank you so much for that, Brother Shane. You provided some great insight this evening. Thank you
Always
for
good to
being
be
with
together.
us.
We'll do it again soon, and I'm
Yes, sir.
honored to
You're
be
our
with
King Center
Dr.
family.
Bernice.
We're grateful to be a part of your community and to have you here with us. Thank you so much.
Love y'all. Yeah, I'll be listening
Love
in
you
on
too.
Dr. West. I love Dr. Cornell. So we'll see you soon. Bless you.